feel, tastes, smells, and or looks like blood. The Allies failed to prevent the death of humans as they draw blood from consenting donors to sustain life for the walking blood banks. Blood is an assemblage that is supposed to solidify the order of the world along a racial standard. A standard to fit sentient beings into the categories of ally and or enemy. These parts combine to state a whole area of geopolitical planning, which shall be dubbed as blood logistics, as Grove in 2019. IR March tracking blood and toes, pathways to jar, first pressing unification, trying to blend single fuel, blood issues, draw lines of enemy, council, political, there's no arbitrary first, let's say this more. Infamous, single drop Africa blood, the reference one drop options, biblical duration, chronology, anterior, announcing apology, metric, genesis was the measurement for the world, the metaphorical job of blood, no match with my blood, plasma, right in the Europe, the North Africa, the church, the war, to increase support, open operations, blood, over, supports, helping, racial evolution, the will control, land, skeletal abuse, violence, based on more than ideology, history, visual sense of mind, body, following us, loyalty, so blood, to call upon master for the movement, preservation, actors, blood, vaccine, blood, to call my blood, speech, the failure to reform method, the failure of method, for love is failure, special, that's very much to say, no life, but seven to fight that form, while being critical, like blood, they'll show that that's a very grounds of war. Thus, the plan, it is felt that the never considered human satiate in spaces of non-consensual violation should end their alliance commitments with the world by terminating their blood oaths. The university and its allies set an arbitrary standard of notoriety for its students, normalizing the constraint of black imagination as an academic capable of freeing the dreams of black students stationed in a space outside the classroom. While black students are forced to interrogate the world capacity, allies are never challenged to interrogate themselves. Instead, the university is compelled to draw from black imagination just to regurgitate it for their own perverted pleasure. That's Emmanuel in 20. I have been punished for explaining my voice being traced out, kick this game, I said the world, I just really good enough to pass my boxes, west is exhausting of the micro, really macro aggression, sorry, lost in faith, law means they are excited to branch for academic with the universe, without saying sad, for itself, I was not like to the owner, see my own alien check, and the little game back. Feminist theory, the consumer same, which is very referred to those who never interrogated themselves that much. I became defensive because I knew that they were consuming data, we revitalized me, used to take me in for their own benefit, and just was let I was during one of my classes, because that's opposed to, I guess, I need to response to that. Basically, once you achieve notoriety for being able to form a DV, I'm positive I can move to the right, divide out hormone links, more over the content, the double net from my own words, the universe skill, back pages, reflect on how others and multiple moments are with the ones who don't like drugs, I'll treat for James Effort, and the time of reckoning is now. The allies will fail to recognize the ideas deployed within the battlefield around them because the elite are distracted by the pandemic and are rushing to defend monuments to their own power. All measures are off because stability has been maintained by both disease and the calculus of expendability that requires 5 people to endure intergenerational traumas. They continue to hold out over and in some future time. This is brand in 20. All my life I've lived the chronic rate of aggressive me every generation of living all my life to talk about the parallels of the same rich about so fabric people there was we got to know life and not just we are still in that normal the disease long as somebody solve the feature the place where somebody trying to do all about special just try to make normal people made us go shots later like this around 180 degrees of light establish correct the ocean Christ the word is learn us all as much we see those moving how rights count this moment rise full spendability so price that police come to free those fights like the seven straight all I meant the match back to see the slow about us maybe for my part of push up different bodies all there with boom never blown up without statutes are falling on message off time of reckoning might be now however a grammar haunts the present from another space and time when and where Audrey Lord is facing death and taking time to reflect on the targeted militarized rates of survival for black people that seeks treatment for disease. Lord's reflections widen the discussion based on correlations that includes both those wars that are initiated by formal declaration and the biomedical ones that have inspired them. Jackson in 20 explains that the York is body social genetically able closer for my culture and genetic march making what you really when you call that purpose function past chill as the president historical bureaus of manifests its generational debility and reproductive disease for low the portion cancer chest racialized disease purpose and equal reproductive material coming into dichotomization body plus lower place the biomedical consequences about couch analysis data by system as well as for biosite ego cultural feedback loop where by matter to large distribution for that to lose states reaction short system first order convey tabak subscriber that said the dominant conception like premature and scope of those specific formal declaration of the biomedical force and as far as the nature of spiritual having equivalent difficulty impact on psychological cognitive outside systems which over time degrades body goes properly regular systems and as the humans and their allies move closer with stars of conquest they explode upon detonation of IDs filled with blood or is it paint that's made to look like blood? The use of blood vandalized the scenario with ceremony blood just in conquest or make a space and time for critics and students to shift their speech towards everyday modes of parasitic self-actualization. This is the keen in 19 as stars so flexible to open and change star conquest can be subverted from the panel to see star of discovery conquest away the moment short step all spatial narrative power is found unknown beyond going violence conquest to distract from subject response to stars and blood short of black and super mosquito from the narrative common sense of course the process making the human this party for black writing for the judging order human spaces or something else or otherwise the American writers from that the totality of the performance of blood tagging the sexual comes all spirits combination of human say definitely theatricality writing sim say talk by those parasitic self-actualization which are volunteers right politics blood lights outside of the most race the march out by digital technology movement says social movement through projects out with require new role for social movement travel card shift towards and this shift draws from a space and time when and where Sylvia Winter reflects on the writing within the Bombos cave when and where the blood on the walls paint that's made to look like blood. Winter challenges writers to reflect upon the necessities for survival as those men made up. This moment of reflection on the paint that's makes it look like blood is a prerequisite for surrender to language practices that rewrite the origin stories of the world anew comes in 20. Sylvia Winter talks about Bombos cave and the overrun on the walls on blood Spain made to look like blood. The Winter challenge species is one of those things blood is Spain men we think you article love what we believe got love what a blood position around these responses to that we made up tools of prior cheese but then and by then Winter means now the history of the humanist and science fiction that's working which we were we make which we can make our cells anew. We have heard of form lives that's available to stable players from my family. So also what teach about the scripture made that category for never received human include my slave answers my stable answers my current edition says that once subject to radio also with whales force water my tree and more this writing required me to let go of my voice and start like practice outside my memory education for political content simply to hack that I have not been alive, and the absence of those laws cannot be filled. The living remains haunted by nothing, and nothingness, the void that civil society does not wish to erase. You got that? Cool. The attempts to be brought to the full world or space of the human are denied, locked away are the prisoners of humanity. They are nothing but their documentation and undocumentable, locked outside the world to give you a slavery McDougal in 19. We can and should continue to develop practice of full methods in the paradox itself, force nothing is present, uncomfortable, stray rights or nothing rather than something we might be the nothing is a black hole over into liberal humans to be jackship present, whether it's being not the projection present, but not the jackship present, but not subject to unfold into the world of human fullness of the world outside of fail purely can see problems and problems that the person reduces favor working and work upright able massive documents capturing fixing recirculation should be sent first to reproduce the world around the survive team maybe to survive with a constant violent possibility of being reduced documentation preserves other method documentation they are simultaneously documentation don't preserve nothing but documentation undocumented outside not only will people say everybody's outside the world of institutional life never crisis is not only should be seen that's so feel the is like the first form of the social system which random ensuring that he rates record about it from their explanation by percent control be violence and silence erasure and exclusion for the archive from the system sedation for the schematics of crisis more generally and the allies seek to capture the affective energy of blackness but fail to interrogate their own cultural coherence work at the level of power relationships keeper and grammar of black suffering that ensures pushback against those playing with black bodies. Keenan Wilderson in 20 I often see these point theorists like that the plus love or metaphor says that in order to become more malleable black is going to wage as where it be for everyone else so hip hop how do we keep that reciprocal values we can when it becomes something you aim someone else tries to make it illusion those body becomes something to which committee can build up because that what you think wishing can also compare themselves to responses to our not science each on its own constitution gesture at present this is a unclosed critique of human gas the effort side support for given for right to back to for sister capacity human not distractions in part will take up as a right search but at the low period I mean this that I will push back I first knew the will be on the kind of worship not include economic supervision on it blessings by the transformation of being a non-intent black swiper to myself back in it is about the correlation between master and slave that's not present because sexy not ours anymore these are themes to think about now the contingent suffering of non-black persons is made possible by truth violence on black people's submission to the black antagonism is a prerequisite to structural changes to the human world as we know in Malacca when 18 the time of coalition not banned on black persons must reckon with the choice to remain neutral part of the political and political accounting about some religious one on civil side of human relationality submit to black status as the black movement and the human collaborations will enable a bit of economic side simply I last one of search of the US preclude the same members of the US while they have a body wanted sometimes to be captured deletion possible also executes the US also executes metaphysical violence which inherits from Western Europe on all the order of non-black suffering is acceptable only if we ignore the ontological primary structure of transition of black the suffering of our non-black and persons to be entirely possible with the suffering of black cats structure the hold on those abilities to activate the hope their press benefits in the state as a big rationalization of our freedom when we do this we macro so I want to testify the absurd the constitutive relations of here that makes the black up their so I are going to be so that it's black other than we previously said like the structural adjustment of our institutionality and you should vote affirmative to refuse to get us a possibility articulated by blood logistics your valid affirmative since the signals and tabernacle of simulacra debate that endorses a new alternative language of abstraction mumble theory in 26 and so to figure out most of the kills in the materiality symbiotics was most of the kill the guy right the world by simulation that mass territories in the equation region or the game science symbiotics possibility of bracket on blocks this is with the most United States black box west will become to the bottom of the bias done the same responsibility for science consequences strong eligibility test we need a new language of abstraction.
Could we get those last two cards before we start cross-eyes? Thanks.
All right, there's that.
I can test this whenever you're good.
Yeah, I'm good. You got him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You all good, Emporia? Cool. First question, why highlight the 1AC in red?
It's the performative way in which the 1AC engages in graffitiing practices and ties it to how we can discursively and rhetorically bloody things in debate as an act of resistance against
So
colonial
you
structures that
discursively bloody something in debate. What is that performance of resistance have to do with the sort of movements cited in the King evidence for re-narrativization,
Right, so,
such as
like,
BLM, such as Standing
We are
Rock?
in debate. We are in a debate round. We have to find ways that we can critically apply strategies that happen in the real world to what's going on in this
Interesting.
world. And so we think that this is an act in which
Debate is not the real world. That's an interesting phrase, but I'll move on.
That's not the argument.
In the tag of the King evidence.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Nico has a corrective to what I said, my bad.
Yeah, the King evidence talks about how we need a shift in speech, and that shift being that of street speech. We think that like choice in blooding certain portions of the 1AC and choosing to have pictures and having different orientations towards language is one way in which we are able to get towards that shift. We think that 1AC is that shift towards it.
I guess my next question is, the Jackson evidence articulates that anti-Black racism has an epigenetic debilitating effect on Black people's health, which constitutes a systematized war. Why is using blood to think epigenetics a good theoretical frame?
I'm not quite sure if I understand the question, but like, let me try real quick. The Grove evidence says that blood logistics structure a like world of violence that is very specifically tied to how geopolitics operates. We think that there's a connection to be drawn between the epigenetic violence that occurs and the way that blood logistics operates internationally.
Why is blood the way that we should understand epigenetics? What does blood have to do with genome?
Cool.
Okay, I have another question then. The Brand's evidence.
I was gonna answer it.
It's fine.
Science-wise, like I'm pretty sure.
The Brand's evidence says that, quote, the rich imaginings of activists who urge us to live otherwise are made into a form. What are those ways of living otherwise, and how does the AF using graffiti to ghostwrite actualize them?
Wait, if I'm like, and Nico, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but like the card says that like the way the status quo operates is they takes those imaginaries and they attempts to make it into reformist shit that like makes it more accessible to individuals. We think that we should move away from that kind of thing. And
it describes there's something rich and beautiful about the imaginings of activists, about concepts of living otherwise. And it says that we need to maintain those things against reform. Yes. What ways of living otherwise are good, and how does the AF actualize
that's the whole graffiti portion of the app. So we think that the way in which the King evidence talks about how like activists were able to go in the night and bloody a Columbus statue and write Black Lives Matter under it is one in which Black people are able to connect themselves with indigenous people. And we think it's one way in which Black people
connect with indigenous people through graffiti to live otherwise. Okay.
I think that's kind of,
I mean, like a little bit. I mean, like you got it.
I've sent out the 1 and 2. It's going to be one off and then case.
Okay, I guess you can.
I'm good when all the other critics and competitors are ready.
I was just about to ask. Okay, we've got another judge.
I just pulled it up. We're good.
Can we get 1 second, actually? Sorry.
You're totally good.
All right.
Did y'all just confirm my item here? Emporia? Okay, sweet. Sorry.
The only question of this debate is whether the affirmative offers a strategy to challenge racial capitalism. The ontology of anti-blackness is locked into place through the alienation of Black labor and abstraction through the form of capital raising. Anti-blackness to an ontological level ignores the contingency of capital. That's our 18. The background darkness to a minimum form of capital fictive substance erase all political standard freedom of the Asian alien black liberty black function combined for regular presupposes domination theater predicted the abstract creation of black no discouraged the onto addresses all political standards first the black artists instantiate individuated discursive with a modern financial system genesis black subordinate for logic enumeration find speculative versus individuated state of black being always already contaminated by the conditions of labor based capital accumulation financial domination of time real estate over transaction insurance versus slave body converted into speculative versus capital economics audio biology the problem the bioepistemic compliance with the dream operative capitalism systematic launcher logical social quantification in terms of black capital farm the capital farm the body can all the actual state financial game was fair so the body only black body was subject to the capital risk and the focus on self-transformation collective affect produces a fragmented model of local resistance that exhausts political energies but cannot meaningfully challenge the state cannot meaningfully challenge state repression or material need only the alt self karmatic indexes an energizing mode of political belonging mutual accountability that solves burnout materially and live in the D19 where political change is not a reaching out political order self-transformation when individual political work study culture production new community spaces ways of seeing our imaginary multi-inflection of those race the multi direct action how to active and organize multi-revolution ability to one another to occupy refuse the choice and to be tailored collective look at the creation ways of living with love feeling good lots of pressure organizing the repression to need more done even the most committed activists even all along my gender diverse I disorganized production displays enthusiasm and accomplishment makes political work not just possible but also gratifying and help to redirect energy back to the accomplishment of the CPU. I'm part of a sense of accomplishment that would never hang over without the accomplishment whenever you political the party give Marxism life and accomplishment the idea of politics abuse causes as inamnesty but to be Wilson defines first even funny like abuse school when he called me comrade holds and equalizing accomplishment for Wilson joy constitution of another instant voters cast with the comrade return just one just Mandela's comrade Mandela stitching back to the multi-gravity shift since today he left person comrades equalizing his position discipline to exercise to take what you ask for the comrade no political belonging comrade I just don't think of the capital society's hierarchy identification as a character utopia belongs up. Power common against all the relations promises one the promise of in relation to reduction to the broader sending attempts at momentary insurrection and academic disruption lock instructions of resilient social control that maintain contemporary neoliberalism. The impact is the absorption and harnessing of the absent surgent energy into the biopolitical apparatuses of capture that sustain global oppression. That's 15. What causes fuel provocative politics touted by such manifestos into order power that links resilience critique to power the middle top 1% more resilient insurrections or interesting part of the resilient social order that justifies self by targeting revolts by continuing to impact the system social order and mobilize a disorder generates violent movements of radical but not always generous seeking emancipation for a little transformation from activity by some demonstration sovereign authority or the regulation of you over 50 years insurrection activity interrupted always be disrupted and crushed or redirected insurrection must persist the revolt perpetuates it and never will promise impossible to pretend to act is going to be manageable for continue the next time the existing work cannot be implemented on the crisis the great of the process insurrectionality unfolds another layer of goal conformity authority structure management insurrection auto strength their ability those authorities may continue third person demanding the ethos of a data with core resilience affirms that almost persistent is enough to capacity for discriminating insurrectionality persisting injustice correct the powers concealed with these realities we imagine this is always improving new global social control resilient governments always are killing insurrectionality their cessation of revolutionary institution building abdicates the potential for true communal power reducing revolution to reactive bursts of energy this debate must be a question of speed scope and scale of revolutionary strategy only dual power organizing can build institutions that meet the material needs of community and construct a revolutionary base in the face of compounding for crises of climate change, imperialism, and fascism. That's 19. Dual parties, mass institutions, environment, material needs, and capitalist crisis, social, agriculture, food distribution programs, granted states by meeting these all while proven social self-management, public institutions, can participate in the only state life, but demonstrating the possibility of regime, but tell years to limit that, prevent catastrophic climate change. We are opposed to the question not whether we're going to save climate change, but surrounded the technical combat crisis, energy infrastructure, price combat, constant altruism, forward business, real estate, compete for skills, political, cheap resources, extraction, for the moon, with infrastructure that can drive a revolution, marching center, developing social institutions with tenants, with organizing the serve people programs that mutually not enough. We cannot make capitalism. We cannot make capitalism environments. Make these institutions part of revolutionary configuration. Have to link together revolution with revolutionary purposes to be radicalized to meeting the needs of communities in which operates revolution future prior to food housing and build base. The alternative is to embrace the comradeship of the party, a partisan discipline, and mutual accountability that enables a shared commitment to an international economy to rise. And the party is not an authoritarian form, but a flexible organization structure capable of scaling beyond moments of joyous disruption to meet the needs of the masses and negate the material social relations of capital, the capitalist exploitation. That's D19. Carbon actions of Walter, but always over our choosing we need to do this because we owe to our carbon of the good carbon parties. That's the ego idea of the effective belonging worse back in those who committed self to struggle carbon flows out of companies and price of love politics, the party that forms a political energy necessary to the politics of your political horizons, companies and highly emancipated out to struggle the proletariat against the determination of life and market forces about division of labor, the basis sex and race. Imperialism and neocolonialism, we see this rise of struggle over women, the color against police, mass white supremacy, incarceration, enables real battles around pipeline, social reproduction, struggles against debt foreclosure, privatization, free housing, healthcare, education, healthcare, free housing, childcare, education, healthcare, the communist horizon, international horizon, anti-imperialist colonization, peace movement, say, communist force negativity, negation of the global capitalist process, communism also the positive alternative based on being social the way collectively determined build the communist sales more than resistant right to require emancipated egalitarian organization, collective life direction of the parties and mistaken for effects of association of those engaged in common in the everyday practice, in the everyday experience of generations of organized revolution to originate a party force been dogmatism government with the party as a political form can scale adaptive expensive to endure beyond the joys and destructive moments in the street, the sheer commitment to common structure generous capacity we have been able to trust and count each other, common names into relation, the common relation makes it what is possible, enables the degree of allocation work in time when one does one and whom doesn't work is determined by shared commitments with willing to discipline a common struggle, expect possibilities for action and incentivize the sense of necessity, which is transformation of work. In time occurs in cross-racial comradeship is not allyship, rather demands that non-black organizers be willing to die for black liberation. Well, While forefronting the political leadership of Black women to the party, their pessimistic reading of the feelings of non-white solidarity discounts the long history of accountability and commitment to the abolition of white community by party formations at C19. Black liberation defense of socialism, one anti-imperialist alliance, while working class with Black workers to secure the Black empires, Washington believes the suspicion that Black people cannot be compromised with white people, Washington prides and example the license concluding the visit to Soviet Union in 1970, which a Russian man reached out to hold the hand of around gesture from camaraderie, communism, defense my hands, and I felt denial of communism in 1949. O'Connor Jones called the white and Black comrades to the field to integrate Black comrades into organizational leadership, the expectation of comrades radical egalitarianism, comrades were the dedicated enough to recognize some personal relation produce political power. Black comrades leadership understood as indispensable to the revolutionary struggle. Those were all good and good reasons Black workers read skeptical. Nonetheless, Burns argues that Black workers recognize white workers being politically useful to Black hero rights supposes an acid test. Communists took this test seriously. Instructions given by the party organizer every communist movement to die and Black people's rights to pay party, and if you get killed, that's all right to the Communist Party race. Other than the Black white comradeship, the Black white comradeship under white people's willing to stand for the Black comrades, white communists had to prove the Black they could defend Black liberation to death. White communists have to give up their property. White is the property in whiteness that the raising conditions possible with unifying working class stories. Black practices going to lie behind the guns of the party only engaged Black liberation for its own as a Communist Party leading the interracial organization of the fight against white supremacy in the United States. Case. The epigenetic politic results in a correctional logic that empties out radical demands to unmake the racializing bonds of the world by reinscribing the correspondence of whiteness and non-blackness into vitalism and blackness to death and woundedness, replies the correctional logics of the state in the name of opposing state negligence, and reproduces the individuated logics of racial capitalism through the valorization of sociobiological resistance. Abolitionist project proves the turn taste. That's not for 20. An abolitionist American looking over the spring rejoices to shift the ship for apparatus and policing the social service of care crimes, instructing social service, idolics space as part of design of racial capitalism, partiality, abolitionist for purpose, revive explanation of the crime system of the liberal conservative crime groups acting on disinvestment, investment in something epigenetic approach policy structure back and good reason deprivation need for social resources impact social groups of the social level epigenetic resource as you can popular most surprising commitment to the fight and reason the message of suicide racial capitalism structure public finance suburban frame condition as the apple white suburban as a leading for the charge for abolition the other side of the privatization of capital available to at least for the only forces of harsh fight against those determines the race specter of criminality and the logistics of visualization of translated abstraction into transactional commodities for capitalism. Informatics, the use of writing and performance is not radical, it only preserves the content creator model of human sociality that atomizes value, instructions 21. Archive of visible logistic visualization provides a form of data visualization considerable computation racial capitalism program provides one certain protocols value aggregation communications infrastructure based capital integrated with the operating system global part that is measured the murder corporeal legislative and rendered as subject for inscription of dissemination of message of visuality means an indispensable feature of the command control functionality computation bounds remains as seen through bounds commentary image code is encouraging oneself the world digital culture builds extension logic financialization economic computation coverage place or rising visual culture parallel with the rise of modern credit and synthetic finance and both the commodity calculus and new calculus of commodities so on the signifier the visual computational culture development context social structure social meanings of production instrumentalization subject function with the polarization of cycle results multiple fractal instantiation subjective agency induced and recovered by prospect individuating networks out of the anti-linguistic vernacular also archive calculus work citing code the double line signification thought aesthetic dimensions of the semantic dimensions company every transaction of the environment as I can be for intersectionality sections of to make it uniform calculus accelerated mathematics and capital mapping and generating real abstraction out of material out of the information process and processing of abstractions in metabolism real material sociality using the material infrastructure and structural emergence accounting the social practice crime yet okay the continuous hypostatization of networks and the app sustains an affective investment of the mythology undergirding whiteness all of this ghostwriting and affective jamming in the visual economy the one circulates blood and violence but those affects don't have a mechanism for release or capture they just cause cycles of energy expenditure that capitulate to the terms of capitalism and anti-black system 15. New when the bodies are of them undertaking occupied space that used to hum they're asking to be heard why are investing turning whiteness pain and pain into erotic concept of concentration or libido whiteness is a typical narcissistic investment privilege by this new liberal age structure where repetition pass over to the present beyond that whiteness is necrophiliac as a necrophiliac power structure not die natural death and properly engineered that was we need to apologize if we feel whiteness it winds up claiming as a result of whiteness having claimed this will think upon themselves injured which whiteness is scarce to be capable of whiteness to express itself as offended by enemies necessary to function deflect I think it's the whiteness require entirely different regime but that's another discourse about on what matters and why. I got 20 seconds left. Test anything.
Oh, the mumble theory card signals a relationship between the affirmative and tab room that you should refuse to affirm because it captures the affirmatives project back into the circulation of the knowledge economy, which is a internal link turn with Gillespie. Or double turn, I mean.
I'm ready for cross-eyes. Y'all muted.
Sorry, I was muted.
You're good.
Okay. The alternative card you read says, or I guess maybe not, the Dean Evans says, emancipation of egalitarian organization of collective life. Could you tell me what that looks like?
Looks like party organizing in communities allows people to distribute power in such a way that one doesn't yield to the state, two produces institutions of.
So your answer is that like party organizing allows for the distribution of power, and that's like good.
Yeah, like our argument is that the only way to produce like egalitarian community organizing is through.
Could you tell me a little bit more about this like distribution of power thing? Like what is distributed? What's the power? Like who gets the power?
So I think that there are two levels to this. There's the level of the power or distribution internal to the organization, which we think is structured around democratic centralism, the way in which a party line is decided by weighted decision making that is given to, for example, Black folks. In the determining of a party line that people are held to by accountability procedures. And then there's the second, which is hold on, no, let me finish. The second, which is the effect of it, which redistributes power on a societal scale to change the libidinal and political economies of the world. These things are in a dialectical relationship and cannot be separated from one another. So why the internal and outside distinctions that you try to draw are problematic.
Can I now ask a question? Okay.
Yes, now you can.
Okay. Internal organization. Could you tell me about the hierarchy? I know you said that it's a weighted voting or some shit like that.
So our argument about democratic centralism is that it's not exactly the same kind of vertical organization that you might criticize in the 2AC. The argument about democratic centralism is that the establishment of a party line is a democratic process that gives more weight to the votes of marginalized people who are inflected more specifically by those decisions.
You keep saying this, that you like give more weight to these votes or whatever, right? Could you tell me like who are the Black people in the party? Do you have like cards that say that people will join your party? It seems like this is a great idea.
The last piece of Dean evidence talks about the model of the Communist Party in the 1950s.
It's also like not Roberto and I's party. Like we're defending groups like the Marxist Center that are run by Black people.
No,
I am a member of the Marxist Center. Our argument, however, is that it is not like Roberto and I's party. We do not have possession of it. It is a collective project that is built and run by Black folks. If it's a collective
project, then like Black people don't have, like they don't own the party either, right?
I mean, no one.
The party's collective. We get rid of property relations, so obviously not.
Oh, cool. Okay. I guess like my last question is the last card. You said that the Dean evidence is like proof that people would join it. I don't necessarily think that's true. This card just says that you have a process by which you can get white people to join in like a non-violent way. Why is like non-allyship, I guess, good?
No,
like,
this evidence also talks about how party structures like the ones instantiated by Claudia Jones are able to combat, or not combat, but at least sort of like alleviate the skepticism that Black workers, like rightfully have against white workers, right? Like our argument is not just that we should convince white people to the party, but convince Black people that they will be.
That is the end of cross.
Thank you.
We're gonna take some time real quick.
I have another question. The giving up property release, like property release stuff that we were just talking about, is that everybody in the movement giving up property?
Yeah, I mean, private property is bad.
That's like
obviously different from individual
private property and personal property are obviously different.
We're not taking anyone's toothbrushes.
Thank you. We stopped it at 6:45. Give me 1 second. I accidentally cut myself on the timer. I'll be right back.
Yeah, please take care of that before anything else. Yeah.
Everything should be sent. It's case in the K. All right. Cool. So everybody's Gucci then. Cool.
I need
Are
a
y'all?
second.
Oh, what?
I need a second, please. My word is being a little slow.
Yeah, no problems, no problems.
What else is?
Fucking no, right? I can't hate you now. Where's the back of this thing?
The back of the thing? Great question.
What's the battery's falling out?
I got it.
All right. So everybody good, or do you still need a sec? Okay. Cool. The smile on the face of the soldier at the NATO blood donation drive in the first image set the stage for the accurate characterization of IR as a humanist horror fantasy that drips of black blood. That's the grove evidence. Number 3 concede and max the lazy that turn all their offense. First is porno trumping the reduction of bodies to flesh for one's own enjoyment. 2 is battle fatigue, physical exhaustion from psychic violence as a terminal solvency deficit to the communist organizing of the alternative because activists do not have the energy for that movement to be sustainable. And 3 is results on a cycle of agent that fuels repetitious satire. The cursed images are in-round examples of absolvency and solved in 2 ways. First, there are IEDs that destroy white supremacist origin stories. The Gums evidence talks about the Columbus cave writing with paymates that look like blood can inform a practice of writing that allows for writers to surrender to new language practices that result in new ways to study the political. 2, the King evidence talks about how graffiti can redirect violence. For example, the blading of the Columbus statue was able to redirect gratuitous bloodletting towards humanity in order to produce a space for anti-humanist and anti-colonial communication and survival strategy development. Their first piece of evidence and it's about epigenetic challenges being bad. First of all, no, their word about abolitionists is just a case about how AOC and suburb politics are framing it. Our evidence is good because Audre Lorde's analysis of anti-blackness as a systematized war is able to take into account the disparate impact that black people have when they try and go for treatment for psychological as well as physical disability, which means that our discussion of anti-blackness as a systematized war is already embedded in that discussion of capitalism and the way in which the industry around survival for Black people is structured. Their argument is saying that the app reserves the content creator model doesn't make any sense when our entire argument is about how you really can't own any kind of quote unquote scholarship, and rather that the way in which you circulate Black scholarship is circulated is based off of mission. That's the McDougal evidence. It's very good at talking about the way in which George Jackson was omitted from the losing Watanabe's anti-Oedipus, even though he was foundational to their ideas of attack and counterattack. The Mimbe evidence flows affirmative because that circulation of affect around blood in the status quo absence, the way in which the U.S. is a part of that necropolitical project of always positioning Black people into locations of death. Their mumble theory analytic doesn't make any sense. Their argument saying that we're latched back into the academy just because we talk about the resolution just makes it so that we absent any implicit violence that's embedded in the language of the resolution. And you should probably think about how that shitty floor functions in the context of this topic. First, on the K. The Amaro evidence was affirmative. The Song Massacre records show that niggas were thrown off the ship for insurance money, but supercharges are often spelled how Black blood is seen as a commodity that can be used or disposed of as determined by civil society. And there's a humanism, slavery and colonialism initiated a chain of events that gave rise to a transnational capitalist order. I'll concede that slaves are not denied humanity, rather rejection and criminalization are used to mark the slaves' humanity, which means we control the root cause. Jackson 20, slavery and colonialism inaugurated transnational capitalist order. Its calculation community dislocate, depersonalize, and collapse difference except in the area of market value. The process of making the slave relied on objection and criminalization of the enslaved humanity rather than merely of the denial of it. Thus, humanization, not antidote, slavery's violence, rather slavery is the technology for producing a kind of human. The overall link question in this debate, you should look at blood packs as just deals used to secure some kind of good for U.S. imperialism. Logistical planning and supply chains are intertwined and are key to the replication of capitalism. It's contingent on the circulation of blood, goods, and services, and Black death are key to their internally. That is what allows for capitalism to exist across different supply chains, which means that you just food after first piece of being evidence is not unique. Those radical imaginings are disappearing. The status quo is reform and inclusion right now. That's the brand evidence, and it flows affirmative comradeship is demonstrated in the Columbus statue graffiti where vandals met in the night to pay Black life into the future. And their reading of Wilderson's joy around comradeship can be read as a justification for the permutation because it shows how theory can be used to forward communist praxis. Perm, so that means perm do both. Perm do the alternative, and perm you do you, we do us. They can do their political organizing, but that space can be open for Blacks to be used for an antagonistic educational project. Wilderson 16. What we're trying to do is infuse an antagonistic orientation of Black people in college so that their intellectual skills can be enhanced by the orientation that's called by Black people in the ghetto. 2 trains running side by side. You can do your political organizing that will help us get relief from police brutality right now, but that work that we do should be seen as beauty. Black Lives Matter is open if new Black political organizing space. So let's use that space for an educational project that's soundly anti-American and soundly anti-police, even if technically I'm not going to read this card that I was going to read on the Luke evidence, but it basically just talks about the way in which we only have a certain amount of time in which the university, they're arguing about how we have a short-lived resistance within the university. It doesn't make any sense when our argument is about the way in which we should weaponize that short amount of time in order to find bursts of energy that we can make, that we can use in the long term to make the longer movements sustainable. The Hegseth-Huntimer evidence for impacts earning their theory of power. The machine of capitalism has been internalized and is speeding up at the pace of an accelerated capitalism. The ocean of alliance commitments is haunted by the blood spilled throughout the Middle Passage, enduring the histories of military incursion and vigilante voting allows for complicity to state power. Hamid, 18, a 20-foot boat was fired off the southeastern coast of Barbados. On board, 11 bodies were found by the Coast Guard, preserved and cascaded by the sun. It's all work together. They paid a Spanish man a mechanic 50,000 euros for the journey. The Spaniard disappeared in Sungal, and the Senegalese band took on the role of the skipper. 135 days later, the boat was by the force of the sea, saltwater, wind, and sun corrugated involved them. They make the bodies of hard the ravages of the sea, connect them to others not seen that fell into the ocean. The ship had been obscured by lack of designation like the slave ship whose roots in ocean currents had followed, and its cargo gives it its name. It cannot be separated from the turning away the safe force of the weather is complicit with that safe power of the willful, averting of its culpable and complicit against the unfettered access given to vigilante boats that stroll the northern Mediterranean shores, keeping migrant ships away. The willful disregard of mysteries that identify the origin of these exodus and policies and military incursions made by the very countries that these boats are floating and fleeing to. Bifo describes how futurism was in trans, but with the machine as something outside the labor, but the machine is inside its signature way he calls the biomachine of our social nervous system. The machine is not in front of us any longer, it's inside of us. Our souls are on the factory floor. We are sped up from the inside out at the pace of an accelerated capitalism. In the group of the second and third pieces of gene evidence, the alternative justice hall, because not everybody has to be in the party, and in order to solve, they need to get the whole world on board, and the all just tokenizes the black people in the movement, and black people are automatically forced to give up the same shit as white people move, and they say that black people get more say in the movement if the way that Gene explains it as a collective. That's the opposite of the kind of party that they want, and there's a reproduction, that expression of sovereignty get co-opted within an anti-black capitalist agenda that rolls back black political demands and allows for war, policing, and environmental degradation. Bledsoe, right 18. As a result of the organized capabilities of political demands made by labor, civil rights, black power, and land reform activists, new manifestation of capitalism work to reverse and appropriate and to redefine the influence of capitalist actors. One effect of the expanding reach of global capitalism is that the roles of nation states fundamentally change. Policing, military, and branches of state municipal funding and taxes or lack thereof are expressions of states already co-opted to benefit capital. The spatial manifest and phenomenal like capital flight and outsourcing. It is in part through such arrangements that the industrialization of states like Detroit, Milwaukee, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh occurred. Anti-blackness makes possible the accumulation necessary for capitalist reproduction. This violence targets those who do not exhibit humanity normalized under Western majority or a spatiality that adheres to individual ownership. The openness of black people to violence and the assumed aspatial nature of black populations remain constitutive factors of the modern world. And the anti-humanist rejection metabolizes fungibility as a space of maneuver and liberation. Their account of the political economy excludes fungibility. Therefore, the all can't solve the F king. And 16, black flesh and spaces as heterotopic function sites as where new possibilities for freedom are articulated as matter that lives outside humanist categories. And black flesh cannot be contained by the rubric of labor. Modes of freedom exist in gare spaces, leaving the body, going insane, suicide, setting fire to the slave state, murdering the settler master, revolt, escape, or just survive. I have 15 seconds left. What else?
Oh, the brand evidence neoliberal status.
Oh yeah, they can see the brand evidence that specifically says that capital is not in crisis, but rather the neoliberal state it created itself is in crisis, which non-uniques decay like hella.
Okay, you ready for cross-ex?
Indeed.
Sweet. First, I want to ask about this argument you made against the alternative that black people that joined the party would be forced to give up the same things that white people give up. Should black capitalists give up their private property?
Should black, what are you talking about, like Jay-Z and shit?
I mean, I guess that's an example of a black person that owns capital, yeah.
Like one, I think that our argument is that it's not that they shouldn't give up their like property, like I think that our argument is about the way in which black people have to be either more invested, are forced to be more invested in the movement. That's our argument.
Okay, so
we face the psychological violence on the front lines when we're engaging in the Communist Party, and also we are forced to give up the same shit, but have to do way more stuff.
Okay, so this isn't exactly about private property, but it's sort of the affective labor that goes into it. That's fine. I guess my next question is about this Bledsoe and Wright evidence. What is an expression of sovereignty, or better yet, what is sovereignty?
What is sovereignty?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you want like the IR answer, or like what do you want here?
I guess this is like in the context of the subject, because that's what I feel your evidence is about.
In the context of the subject?
Well, yeah, like a sovereign subject.
Yeah, so I think one, when Bledsoe and Wright is talking about like sovereignty, it's in the context of nation states, in which like certain nation states have different, our nation states functions change in order to and are ordered by imperialist agendas. So we think an expression of sovereignty are things like reform. We think that engaging in things such as political parties are things like that.
Okay, so all political parties operate on the same level of reformism? Because I feel like
I don't
that
think
begs the
that's
question of
what
whether
I
they're
said.
participating
I
in the
don't remember
electoral
saying
model.
that. I think that engaging in the political I think that the Bledsoe and Wright evidence is talking about specific ways of engaging in the political in which you are making specific kinds of demands on the state in which you are still appealing to an imperialist agenda. And it specifically talks
so the
about
internal
how,
link is demands on the
land
state.
reform, Black Power movements, civil rights movements were specifically used to reify capitalist gains.
For sure. Next, I want to ask about the sort of like Columbus statue example you used to sort of like justify that the act includes some aspect of comradeship. What was the sort of long-term political movement that was enabled by the Columbus graffiti? Like, was there an organization that formed in the wake of that?
Well, actually, I'm glad you bring that up because the King evidence, King, when she writes about the Columbus statue, is very specific about the way in which when that group came and one belayed the statue and then wrote Black Lives Matter, like people were looking around to see, okay, who were the artists involved? So they went to the Black Lives Matter organizers in that city, and those Black Lives Matter organizers were like, nah, we don't know who did it, but we support those movements, but we support that action. And even when those statues are cleaned up, they're still constantly defaced. So we think it's a continual project of graffiti and destroying property.
Okay, that's fantastic. You want to take prep?
Yeah, we'll take a little bit of prep.
Oh, we start prep at 7:24.
Yep. It's just one card. Does anyone care if I just toss it in the what's it called? The email chain? The text
Body.
email chain? Body. Words.
Works for me.
The order is going to be the criticism. You should flow down. I'll try to answer most of the things in order, but I will be signposting where I'll be answering arguments a little bit above or a little bit below where they are. Okay, Rakim is good. Cool. I'm waiting on one last thumbs up.
I think we've got everyone.
We do?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, awesome. It is easy to graffiti on this world, but it is hard as fuck to build a new one. Revolution is that difficult work that we have limited time to accomplish, as accelerating imperialism, incarceration, fast takeovers, pandemics, ecological destruction, all push the planet and us beyond the capacity to recover. Your battle is a binary choice between organizing with a partisan discipline and a shared commitment to build communism as the system crumbles, or continue the legacy of reactive and local politics like the affirmative that lets fascists govern in armed white supremacist militias take the system's place as they graffiti on statues with blood. Extinction is coming, and it's irreversible. Things can and will get worse in the interim as fascists expand police militarization, prisons, firing militias, foreign military bases, all while austerity destroys every basic social system that makes survival for black people possible. Even if racial capitalism is inevitable, its effects become substantively worse for black folks because especially black women and queer people under unfettered corporate despotism, as housing, food, healthcare, education programs, and even debate and academic spaces are rolled back, which means any reason why they find places to survive for antagonistic educational projects like the Boulder State Evidence Show, and they argues there's a reason why our organizing with a scale of revolution in mind is necessary to actualize black survival and psychic health. Therefore, framework, this debate must be about competing praxis, not competing orientations or relationships. To debate, the system can only respond to material disruptions and the circulation of surplus value, but it thrives off of false schemes of resistance that can be affirmed by attaching aspiration to the production of a self and the contractual relations to which cultural and human capital are actualized like the affirmative, which means you should negate any strikes that feels confine capitalism materially. Negation is good. Any other moral sacrifices, mutual accountability, and debates revolution potentials, and network of activists and scholars committed to the inner refinement of ways of living otherwise that they give up on as per the 1AC cross-sex. This is Dean in 19. Egalitarian potential, abstinent party, hardly stronger than feudalism and refugees fleeing resource wars are present, heavy central for realization, some potential over other conflict, overkill, kind of mobilize cards, force corporate organization, insurance, because the limits of immediacy and horizontally. Thank God's already more than a political movement, commentating, bring together struggles, they instill enthusiasm, inspire imitation, revolution, belief requires discipline, choice, contemplating, and requiring, and what prioritize how to allocate resources to energy capitals, as guys reach the point the system and fragile, how to place our oppressive state apparatus. If we do not know, actively do not know this, a party fights form that we can let us know. That answers the last argument they made in the truancy about how to and saying the neoliberal state is collapsing, but cap is not. Yes, it is. The next argument, the Amaro perm, is not a perm argument. The argument is that blood was transformed into a commodity, which means they've, as the truancy has conceded, our theory of anti-blackness have produced an immature relationship of black flesh to a kindness of financialization. That's why every incarnation of anti-blacks has been a mechanism of capital, from slavery to sharecropping, the prison industrial complex. Financialization enables commodification and alienation as logistics turns flesh and dead and blood into data and labor and commodities for dispossession that conditions non-black people to associate black with criminality, and produce a libidinal economy for the irrationality of these compounding material relations. Semiotics emerges of the circulation of these signs of financialization, where knowledge is transformed into information about black death in things like legends. Why is that Akia Jackson isn't and a good offense against us? We agree that the origin moment of racial capitalism was enslavement and colonialism. The question and is how it proceeds. Their arguments about logistics reveal the problem with the two which they have consistently identified the global militarized scale of racial capitalism or prescribed a solution at the individual level that cannot approach solvency at the scale necessary, which means any psychic health or porntropic impact is fundamentally not unique and inevitable, absent a response to material base that makes that balance inevitable. That is the materiality of enslavement and colonization. But independently, this logistics argument is a link argument for us. You cannot combat logistics at the level of the individual because it routes around small sites of disruption, which is proven by the failure of union organizing a dock worker strike, which is why graffiti cannot confront logistics, because the supply chain will keep on moving and will transform your art into an NFT for further destruction of the environment. They say comradeship of the 1AC was good. This kind of reveals the problem with their identification of comradeship, which is it has no relationship of accountability. There's no organizing analytic within it, because there's comrades were aligned with each other in an affinity group, but they could not hold each other accountable, although within a party structure, nor do they have a shared set of tactics, nor a set of institutions or a political horizon beyond simply graffiti. There's no organizing analytic analytic means that any problem that you identify with R, or the alternative, is magnified in horizontal organizations, which replicates the failures of the group like the Philly Anarchist Medical Collective, those bunch of people who came together autonomously to provide healthcare to black folks, but that literally could not hold people accountable for sexual violence and end up breaking up, which is the problem when they think that comradeship is just as doing anything with your friends. There's a link argument because it proves the organizational structure of comradeship is necessary because it requires that we hold ourselves mutually accountable, which I'll do the rest of the alternative here. The alternative to affirm Communist Party organizing only a democratic centralist organizational apparatus can arm communities with theory and practice to connect local institution building to a global movement. This requires holding each other to a revolutionary party line that organizes our political entities towards meeting the material needs of the masses rather than performance, as well as the shared commitment to the intimate protocols of accountability and partisan discipline that you find when you organize comradeship around a party line, which redirects feelings of investment in black people's revolutionary objects and feelings into feelings of accountability with and to black people or for non-black people. The alternative endorses movements like the Marxist Center Network that includes the Red Room Collective in New York, the 10 organizing acts of area. They build dual power through reparations, mutual aid, and child care programs that enable radical forms of community care and investment. The anti-eviction work, healthcare, or the food and healthcare clinics. They expand political power for communities beyond the horizons of survival, which is the affirmative. They look like the field medic work that my comrades and I do in an attempt to address health disparities and unhomed to black communities in Winston-Salem. These are things that are led by black people. It's not a question of dispossessing black people or asking them to give up more, but rather it's a question rather their affirmative forces all the labor of revolution and survival both onto the black people, especially the most marginalized like black women, which makes burnout worse. Only a party line organized around solidarity and comradeship can resolve labor offense because it forces non-black people to put their lives on the line, which is the Dean evidence that does a history of communist parties and the way in which non-black solidarity activates the potential the potential for blackness through the accountability of white people towards those things. The alternative does not need to solve the entirety of the world. We only need to win that a revolution is possible. It only takes 2% of the population to do it. And things like Cuba or Burkina Faso all prove that it's possible to do it in an egalitarian way where yes, there are black people who have more decision making in a party line. That's what democratic centralism is. It also has things like independent review boards that can hold party leaders accountable. It means that there's transformative justice procedures like struggle session that resolve interpersonal conflict to political conflict when people are racist. We can kick people out of the party when they are. It takes years to become a full member of most party, which because they have to correspond to the not just the political ideology, but also the libidinal relations have to be validated in order for them to be within it, which answers their arguments. We're not sovereignty, but rather their evidence about sovereignty is an argument how capitalism has adapted the civil rights and the Black Panthers. The reason why the solvency threshold is far higher, or fungibility doesn't answer the work I did on Amaro because we're not disputing it. Okay, the permutation and the permutation debate. I did most of this with the Dean evidence on framing the perm is theoretically illegitimate because it's key, because no perms and method debates is key to the activist skills and education when making a choice between different advocacies, which is important. The momentum DA should put the nail in the coffin here. The perm is the logic of addition that delays revolutionary politics. Their anxiety towards political organizing collapse the party line to ideological eclecticism, which is a time frame argument that outweighs the perm because the affirmative slows down the alternative too much to see power in the face of fascism. But the new spaces argument that Wilderson is going for is about opening new organizing spaces and using those. The party is the best analytic and form for antagonistic educational products. Think about the political education of the Black Panther Party. All of those things are better, which answers the permutation and permutation to the alt is theoretically legitimate. I did that work above. Perm to each doesn't answer our offense because it's not because of the question of what praxis is best. As in the first place, they say weaponized university. That will be in the war and art. They say capitalism internalized. Yes, but our argument is that the material base has created that libidinal economy, which is why people do irrational stuff with anything that is seen as an object. But there's a link argument here because the first imagination is a gut reaction to acute anti-Black violence that affirms a cultural project in a world governed by economics. Ghostwriting is a form of cultural artifice that prevails to any community care because writing the one you see in blood participates in that visual economy of science, which collapses their politics towards a representational. It's not resistance. It's just a simulation of it. The hyper-identification with the anti-Black violence that prevents authentic cultural expression because it locks in a wounded attachment with blood itself. Think about how they have never given you a new genre of the human, nor prescribed to any result of graffiti beyond the performative. It reveals how the aesthetics of the one you see are self-defeating. It's the reason why you can vote negative on presumption because the things like graffiti are the status quo and descriptive of the kind of local and fragmented politics that are bread and butter among day left, which means the app is both non-unique and non-inherent, which turns into energy because they leave Black people to constantly react to state violence instead of producing collective institutions where that violence isn't inevitable in the first place, along with the generation of specific political lines. The second argument is incorporation, cultural performance like ghostwriting gives neoliberalism another faux transgression by the illusion of resistance. For example, BLM was transformed from a graffiti slogan into a non-profit industrial complex that makes cops better and gives them more funding happening, and then into state-funded paint on streets reveal how performance is captured and bled of its actual revolutionary potential. Our localism cannot resolve these things because it might shift narratives against genocide, but it always fails. It is proven by Standing Rock, where the pipeline was still built and the lack of accountability procedures meant that rapists in the occupation almost collapsed it, which means that there's a redeployment impact because capitalism cannot be chipped away at. It requires collective action. Where's my water bottle? There. Okay, I'm ready for cross-sex whenever y'all are.
All right, sick. So I want to spend some time on the alternative here. So what can I do in the party?
I mean, that's the argument, is that you can debate, discuss, organize, go to political education, build healthcare programs, build unhoming programs that help meet the needs of Black people materially.
Can I do graffiti in the party?
I mean, that depends on the party line. There are instances in which the party.
Whoa, wait a second. Why? What does it depend on?
Well, so that's the argument, is that if you want to say graffiti should be the position of the party, we should do these things as a political praxis, then it begs the question of, is that good within the construction of the party line, i.e. determined by political education, by discussions that are democratic within the party about whether or not it would further the goals of revolution.
Let's say you create that democratic selection or whatever, and you decide like, hey, we're not going to do graffiti. What happens to that person, who like wanted that graffiti portion?
I mean, they should generally be like, okay, if that's the decision of the collective based upon political analysis, I can disagree with it, but I understand and I trust my comrades, and so I'll go along with it. Like, obviously, people can.
They're just made. Yeah. How does trust get established?
Imminently. It happens when I show up for political struggle and you show up for political struggle, and we work.
So just because I show up to the protest, I'm supposed to trust everybody who's at the protest?
No, it takes a while. Like, for example, that's the argument I was making about how membership in parties take years.
Trust to happen at the scale you need.
There's no like fine line, like this is how many times you have to do trust. Trust is something that is a sliding scale that we build over time. Like, I won't trust anyone after a Zoom call, but if I show up and see someone working with me for years.
Cool, thank you. So you make this number saying that you need only 2% of people to solve. Where'd that number come from?
There was a sociologist who looked at revolutions in Burkina Faso, Cuba, Latin America, and in a series of like revolts throughout the rest of the world, like India, and came up with the idea that that is the threshold for which the complete overturn of a state and economic system is necessary.
So it's 2% of like each state's population, or what?
2% of a given population in a given area, i.e., like in Cuba, they had a series of guerrilla revolutionaries who organized the agrarian population through a democratic party structure that then was able to engage in protracted people's war against the Cuban state. And that managed to overthrow the state. It didn't require most Cuban people get on board because capitalism breeds political apathy and political disenfranchisement. In the end, they were killing slave owners, they were killing landlords, they were killing factory owners, and people didn't fucking care because they hated them too. They don't need to be on board, but capitalism's libidinal structure isn't complete like that.
Glad to hear they don't need to be on board. Gotcha. Cool.
The order's going to be the K. I'm just going to finish up something Tessa didn't get to, and then the case. I'm going to send out a card. The doc I'm sending out has 2 cards in it, but I'm just reading the Marriott card that's in there. The other one just happens to be in this doc, and I'm too lazy to make a different one.
Oh, is the one in our app on the Dropbox? I would appreciate that.
Okay, can I get confirmation from everyone that we got the evidence? Okay. Sweet. And Emporia? Fantastic. Another example of the failure of their strategy is Mossville, Louisiana, a neighborhood of color rallied together to react against the placement of a toxic waste plant near their homes. They succeeded by speaking out and relying upon their narratives of personal experience and community resilience, but the plant only moved towards another neighborhood of color. This is the logic of gentrification, local success, and taking space absent. Organizing with scope and scale just enables the shifting towards elsewhere to do more balance and less resilient communities. Go to case. Our number evidence indicates that their capacity to retool the epigenetic technology of blood as a tool for revolution is a fundamental failure. Although it can frame itself as radical, it falls into the trap of biological essentialism by attempting to codify anti-blackness as a neurological and genetic relation. For example, the 180's frame of intergenerational trauma is an application of enlightened faith in the scientific method to track and account the legacy of anti-blackness through neurological effects and the genome. One that overlooks the historical material formations of those structures of violence by racial capital, prioritizes tracing the violence done to the subject and the means by which that violence is done, rather than the infrastructure that produces it, which de-radicalizes practice by avoiding the political confrontations necessary to negate the violence of racial capitalism. Two, it puts liberation in terms of the bios, which is itself socially and materially produced prioritizing effects over causes, which I impacted out above. This begs the question of the way that a sort of neuropsychological research produces a sort of ineffective visualization of the body, because there's never a fucking control group for what the brain looks like without gender or without racialization, which is exactly why they can never produce a sort of revolutionary understanding of the subject that can actually reach out and produce the sort of counterpower that Tess was talking about. In the critique 3, it preserves a false distinction between the interiority of the subject and exteriority. They believe that the reclamation of interiority is capable of exerting control over its exterior without building the power necessary to do so, which internally turns all of their sort of solvency turns. They try to go for on the capitalism critique because the sort of alternative is not an expression of sovereignty, and so it tries to reduce us, because it tries to eliminate the sort of property relations that are integral to the production of sovereignty. Rather, they're a sort of reclamation of an alternative type of sovereignty that articulates itself through the breaking of the blood oath, which is exactly what their criticism applies to. For it ignores the violence that produces the scientific techniques that they attempt to retool, things like resource extraction, interventions, and the disappearance of non-European modes of understanding in the world, in order to create a sort of over-representation of scientific understanding as a true and ethical scientific imperative, as opposed to that which has been reproduced by the quote bad scientists that produce race science. At the end of the day, it still applies the same techniques about ignoring the sort of historical material conditions that allow those things to exist, which one creates a sort of overlooking of the way that their techniques apply themselves and sort of rely on a parasitic relationship to the global south, and two, produces an inability to understand the failures of their method. What Knopper is referring to there answers the sort of question of how it's a critique of suburb politics, which doesn't apply to the affirmative. But what Knopper is referring to in the context of suburb politics is the codification of community codes through the provision of aid by the government, which is why they have to frame anti-blackness through neglect that proves that their choice answer is totally insufficient, doesn't get to our amber answers about epigeneticism being a failure. You can evaluate this as a pick out of their understanding of anti-blackness through the scientific regime integral to their winter evidence, to their evidence referencing winter and the use of blood. Even if they win, the act of graffiti is contingently good, you should separate it from the analytic that they use to frame it and vote negative. And their use of winter's retooling of Fanon's theory of sociology is bankrupt. The scientific account of human strips black flesh of the experience of the phenomenological account of their dependence on the scientific observation recolonizes blackness because it only understands the process of invention as transcending the biological imperative. They merely use phenomena as an instrument for transgression towards an essentially utopian world where blackness is made present through a collection of data depicting its absence. That's Mary 11. The view of social cognitive along lines of has become matter popular belief that the rising the trough of the Western epistem, according to Winner's article in evolutionary terms and conscious phenomenological principle, offers a new theoretical object of knowledge, which I think the majority indifference, although Winter represents its principles essentially phenomenology as use of it as essentially radical departure. The true pulse of sociology refers to the experience of consciousness not reducible to these narrow biological processes. Even Winter's formulation sociology is entirely confined to strategic academia, whereby invention is constituted in highly problematic terms as an epical rupture that allows us to go beyond the current histories of the human. I don't think attempted to represent sociology as a psychological law of phenomenon, careful questioning the limits between philology and ontologies. Universally read as called new scientific description of the world, they harness the findings of the natural sciences, including the neuroscience, to its purposes, yet able to transcend them in terms of new state. This is Winter never questions the implications of relying on scientifically determined concepts, which neither blacks or white man to be denounced or reinvented as the ultimate science. The formal undecidability of what I really called phenomena of future of what I earlier called for future imperfect emphasis what seems to be on the failures at the level of the psyche that are nowhere subordinate by centralizing ideology of the master narrative. I shall be derelict. Convention has both positive and negative dimensions. It is to preserve itself as the promise of endless creativity, must leave all teleological methods derelict. Next is the sort of visibility. It's how they've conceded the thesis of the Beller evidence, and in fact supported it with the reading of a sort of evidence referencing BIFO. The capitalism's extraction of cognitive labor from its subject is based around the production of taglines and images that can be identified within a singular moment of affective production. The production of their politics to the image enables its circulation on platforms that don't produce revolutionary organizations but do extract value through ad revenue
revenue and data mapping that allows corporations to enact control over populations. They are a Twitter revolution. Their cursed images can be circulated on social media and acquire likes and retweets that provide more information that can be retooled to extract value from those that interact with it. They don't have an internal link between their supposed moment of rupture and the emergence of a counterpower capable of translating that into revolution. Their Columbus example, their articulation of across the blue that it sent people to the BLM organization because they had some sort of reaction to seeing the vandalism of the statue, which is fundamentally, for example, it's sharp that the BLM is an organization that has been devolved into reformism, not because of the people inside of it wanting to do so, but through the visual medium. Things like black boxes on Instagram and their edgy looking re-highlighting, for example, the way that the depiction of BLM to the media had to be reduced to something rather than abolitionism to a police reform so that it could be acceptable within the medium of the translation of information can be rendered into something profitable. It means that their articulation of the image, one, is never under their control, but second, the assumption that they do have control over it prevents them from reaching out and creating a more sort of revolutionary organization. Also, their answer to this, they said that they said that also their answer to the bill of evidence that we can't own their argument about how we can't own our scholarship. They made this argument about George Jackson being omitted from DNG. The Membe evidence and the Beller evidence impact turn this because it's a cruelly optimistic relationship to the academy insofar as that their sort of request for representation, for the recognition of their representation through images and the affirmation of that as a sort of simulacrum that can rupture debate, as per their mumble theory evidence, is a mode that one assumes that they can control their representation, and two, assumes that that representation has any internal link to the production of health for Black communities, which internal link turns their arguments about being able to produce that rupture. Also, it overlooks the fact that what happens in debates is not reducible to the ballot. Inserting a W or an L into tab room is not a revolutionary moment, but a reduction of the discussion and revolutionary engagement that happens in debates to an informatic data tool that can be then inserted into the informatic regime of capital, which is what all their evidence is talking about, but they can't get around.
We're gonna start it.
We have 235 left.
Okay. Everyone hear me? Sounds good. Okay, cool. It's cool. Going to be case and then the K. Good. Okay. Vote affirmative to rewrite and bloody the alliance system. The cursed images of God conceded they prove solemn to per the act. But one sees an active underground communication that graffitis over the world's alliance system in order to allow for a shift in language practices that redirects and disrupt violence, battle fatigue, and important trophy that way their offense because the exhaustive mobilization by the alternative forces labor on the backs of black bodies to endlessly while they stand by and watch. That kind of parasitic enjoyment causes psychic violence by extracting value into black being. That turns all their offense because it A, not unique to one in our extraction offense, and B, is a massive dissent to the alternative. The first part of the one in our offense, blood is an important analytic to understand the moment of convergence between physical and psychological trauma. It does not end at the epigenetic mark, but uses epigenetics to understand the beginning of how blood transfusion operates. It ends and understand the entirety of the biopsychoecological feedback loop, which they have conceded. They say the alt doesn't eliminate, doesn't do sovereignty, this eliminates property. That proves all the blood noise right evidence that I will do there in the second. The next part of the 1 hour is about separation from an analytic and extraction. The McDougall evidence has gone conceded. It says that specific epigenetic study and scholarship gets rejected as an act of refusing black knowledge creation. That's bad because it means that the black being always remains undocumented under the epigenetic framework. They say visuality, circulation is not unique of all of those things in the first place. And George Floyd proves that the circulation of his sets with the sort of creation of blood, with the injection of black trauma that sparks things like activism. The app is different than this, and instead it's not an injection of black death, but rather it's an injection of images of a black future and resistance possibilities. The ballot is a way to redefine the way that literature has been reduced to undocumentable bodies, and is a way to signal throughout the simulacra if they're right about visuality, and using the ballot as a moment of disrupting the visuality that happens on tap in the first place. The critique versus framework at the top interprets that with the competing methods debate, the affirmative should be able to test the
answer the pick portion.
Oh, picks are bad. There is a body snatching argument here that takes black labor and black motives and knowledge creation in order to garner it as their own offense. That is also proven by everything that I said above about the different ways in which black being is rendered undocumentable in the status quo. The pick only does that and continuously excludes that form of knowledge production, which is bad. Reject the pick. Even if it's not all the performance stuff I did at the top is impact defense too. Yeah, back to the case. The affirmative should be able to test the competitive nature of the alternative, which answers surplus value, because without sensitive competition, we would have shallow two shifts passing the night debates, which fails both app and neg educationally. No other standards on here theory, and the permutation proves it's not a praxis debate. It's a method debate, the alt debate. I'm going to do that at the top first. Extend to AC blood noise and right. It's offense and definitely not effectively answer dual party organizing is bad. It's about the way in which the Communist Party created new forms of capital. The redaction is the way in which we can disrupt the ability for the university to require a specific way of production, which answers their offense here. But it means that the alternative strengthens a bunch of things. First, the determination of nation states. Second, policing. Third is military interventions. Fourth is state and municipal funding. And fifth is taxes. All of those become influenced by global capital. It means that the alternative would fail to access its time frame and solve arguments of the 1 year highlights. That also turns the whole alternative debate because it results in the deindustrialization of cities like Detroit, Milwaukee, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, where undervalued locations become real estate targets for the party. That answers 2 and C and 1 are examples of locations because it proves that the negative causes that shift away. And it means even if they win a link, we control the root cause of capitalism, which only the alternative creation, which means that if they win exportability, it only sustain the system of capitalism. I don't have an answer flow to the King 16 evidence from the 2AC. The indigo bat was a non-secret zone where the slave master couldn't go because it was poisonous with slavers. Slaves were able to labor to get the indigo out. They were outside of the silent of the master where they taught different strategies to escape, revolt, and kill the master to survive. It answers their insurrection offense and all. It means that all we need to win is that the app provides routes of survivability within the capitalist system. That also provides defense against routes of that also provides great defense against extinction because it proves that the structural condition of H-type block systems always already one of violence and extinction that not needs the impact offense from the top of the 2 and C and answers 2 and C D, and because they have it run, it's not about foregoing ways of living otherwise. It's about preventing those dreams of living otherwise from being commodified into reform and inclusion, like the cruel hub of the alternative. You should hold into a high threshold on the 2% argument. Who is in the 2%? Why is 2% sufficient for the U.S. when all of your warrants for this argument come from other different places? Now you should remember crossings of the 2 and C when we ask them, what does it look like to be in the party with graffiti? It all depends on party lines. If graffiti is able to be there, that's our argument about the way the political and the party limit the political imagination of black activists. They say black people will be cool with it because they should have trust in their comrades. Remember, the countless protests were undercover officers in the crowd with organizers. Black people should not and cannot just trust those comrades who have that best interest in mind. Now, there's a link turn blood packs or just deals that are used to secure some kind of good. This is the logistical plan argument that I do not think was effectively answered. Supply chains are intertwined and are keys to the replication of capitalism. It is contingent on the circulation of blood, goods, and services, and black death are keys to their internal link. This is what allows for capitalism to exist on and across different supply lines. I'll do the permutation debate now. It answers the link definitely that we get a permanent method debate. They didn't have a warrant for this argument to test competitiveness of their method. Their universities link is going to the status quo that two train solves as access to top level values for framing offense because the dean evidence is Ron Wilderson says that voting negative pits activists against activists and finds the potential movements to the status quo. This is about taking advantage of moments and cracks within time that can weaponize bursts of energy against dominant antagonists with their evidence of Wilderson's void of commerce and proofs of permutation solves that. Yes, we are new spaces of organization that can occur alongside yours. The two strategies themselves can be commerce, but that doesn't mean that the strategy has to be one and the same. That solves every link because even if we lose the permutation, two trains gives you defeats towards two political orientations, not true enough. That also answers the top level framers debate because it means that we are not tied to a singular focus. They say that the Amaro evidence says that the conceded theory of power. This is just affirmative. The entirety half of the 2 and C was just proof of the fact that we are winning the root cause debate because they have not answered the Jackson evidence, which says that the ledger system created the slave trade. It means they don't get offense off of in your network of scholarship arguments. They said individualism fails. That the warrant for this argument was union organizing, which was a collective itself. They say comrade accountability, but they have not provided a method of accountability for their movement except for giving up property or giving up capital, which is all wrapped up in the blood joys and right evidence that says that when that giving up those things happens, the state then takes advantage of that and uses those as new zones of conflict in private organization.
The last argument is like BLM performs this thing that proves that at some level collective organizing of the alternative would fail, and we need to inject some form of imaginative capacity into those.
Okay,
Cool.
We've got 724.
7, 2, 4. Start. Okay. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, we're unmuted.
Awesome. Order is going to be the criticism and then the case.
We can make sure everyone's here first.
That is my way of making sure everyone's here.
Okay. All the judges are here.
Okay.
Emporia, are y'all good?
Okay. Awesome. Let's go. The world as we know it is ending, and the 1AR has not grappled with the uniqueness questions that I forefronted at the top of the 2NC. We are living in a world where fascist takeovers, environmental destruction, escalating imperialism make life worse and unlivable for the vast majority of the planet. Even if racial capitalism and logistics, blood logistics, and all of this are inevitable, they will get fundamentally worse under unfettered corporate debts. There's no survival when austerity rules. Black housing, food, or health assistance, housing assistance programs, etc. It makes policing worse and surveillance, and the state's omnipotent debate itself will die as the university is rolled back and defunded, which is we're already seeing in the destruction of debate programs throughout the country. That means this debate is only a question of the speed, scope, and scale of revolution. Only the party can actualize a revolution on a global scale capable of supplanting it before we all fucking die. Which is the fundamental question is that life will either be unlivable or much fucking worse. There's no deficit. The alternative rises the level of solvency takeout, which means that blood arguments are flipped because the blood. The circulation within the commodity form will become far worse. The second level of this is there's a presumption argument that goes along with it. The affirmative is the bread and butter of the status quo. Graffiti is happening, and there's no way in which it's doing more of it could result in anything more than simply sending people to more BLM meetings. It is the bread and butter of the status quo, and what have we been doing for decades, which is the problem because there's non-unique and non-inherent, which they top-level reason to vote negative regardless of their offense, because people will always find interim modes of survival. The question of this debate is how do we produce a space where that survival is not questioned. It's the only question that you're about to decide. Just means that you should make forced choices and difficult trade-offs because the question of where we allocate our limited time, resources, and energy is something that requires the discipline and discussion. Even if you could do both, it's important to build the question of political practice by engaging in a practice of partisan discipline and conscious planning about how we should prioritize our energy, which means voting negative doesn't have to say there's no possibility for anyone to graffiti on their own, but rather it should not be the horizon and the central strategy of our political practice. They should not get a reputation because it collapses the possibility of that conscious planning and partisan discipline and the capacity for us to hold each other accountable for the flaws in each other in our scholarship in order to produce a better political horizon for all of us. It was all in the conceit of gene evidence, which answers the vast majority of their we get a perm argument. There are 2 points of offense they might be able to win on. The first is the energy debate. We're running a straight turn here. Localism and performance and political tragedies burn out Black people more. They're endlessly reacting to acute state violence and all the emotions that come along with it. But cannot produce a world where that balance does not happen. It results in things like the Standing Rock argument where it burns it could not respond to the pipeline because it did not respond with the scale necessary to which meant the pipeline still got built. But rapists in the party were able to proliferate violence to such a point that it collapsed the organization because there was no capacity for the holding them accountable because there was no clear procedure or for that accountability or a party that could do those things. That turns their trust arguments because how do you trust the people who show up to graffiti with you are not snitches? The question that it means is only the party provides a form that might be able to create trust in the long term, which also flips all of their labor arguments because Black people are forced to do all the labor of revolution and survival both in their world, but under the party comradeship actualizes the political potential of Black and non-Black people alike in order to redistribute labor. It's the only possibility because they have not given you an analytic for how they redistribute it, which means we're linked during the energy debate. Only the party solves. When you have to work 3 jobs, it's pretty hard to find time to graffiti. The alternative solves that. It provides things like food, housing, programs, etc. that scale up the dual power and mutual aid to meet the needs of the masses that allow them to find some version of psychic life, which answers the vast majority of their arguments on the flow because they conceded the link to make the last argument. They're going to actually, they have no specific perm text, which means tell me at 1:30, which means that they've made 3 permutations. They're not extended a single specific one of them. You should reject that. Tuner is the hardest speech, and they always have the last word, which makes them a moving target, makes them possibly negative, which means I shouldn't have to answer it. The blood host evidence says that it misunderstands the form of the alternative. We're not things like municipal plunger, nor do we result in a state, nor can the state capture those things because the alternative actualizes a revolutionary party building organization that has empirically worked throughout the global south and in the global north. Things like the BBB in Chicago prove that we're able to combat gentrification far better than they are the questions of fungibility, not
get to the question of survivability because they still lives in a world where survival is questioned, not one where we can make it, and not which is endlessly they link to our politics of reaction. Like the party line argument, yes, some limits on our political horizon are good because some politics are just ineffective or bad, which when not, and that sets up mutual exclusivity between us. But the question is the party organization and the democratic centralism, do you things like weighted decision making, accountability boards, transformative justice, leadership, but all of these things are accountability mechanisms they just haven't answered to, which means don't let the Driel grandstand on this logistics. They've conceded my term with that logistics proof. The scale of capitalism is too big. The root cause of it, who fucking cares? We agree that racial capitalism is the both question that the material base prefigures the libidinal structure. The Wilson argument will be answered on case the university is collapsing now. Go there. The epigenetic picks is an easy way to vote negative, even if they can't justify their example of tactic contingent arguments of rise. They have no justification of the frame analysis they use as the function of the enlightenment imperative of scientific rationality. A worse or historically immaterial understanding of black is better, even if they win some benefits. The Marriott and the Nopper evidence impact on the capacity to gain a reclamation of science to a revolutionary form. Phenomen's concept of sociology is supposed to be a new object of knowledge to which we can still revolutionary subjects, but they have attempted to retool it for the truest and this iteration of science. This plays faith in the capacity of science to improve itself without addressing the social and material formations that form the subject of scientific thought and data collection that fosters a new transcendental subjectivity. You don't produce a new language a la Gumps, but rather reuse the old language of white of white supremacy that produces information necessary for the continued financialization of blackness via data paradigms and so of health. Only one our answer was that it could bless useful and but that doesn't answer our office to prove that it's better than historical materials conception. The Picks is not stealing their labor. They said the choice that no one has ownership over scholarship, but the Picks simply agrees the F method might be good. The frame analysis worth rejecting. At worst, reject the argument given that we don't own it. The George Floyd example, this doesn't answer our argument. We're saying the black dude is commodified because it's reduced to a data set within the economy of visuality, the same as the sciences was the Beller evidence and the Membe evidence.
It's 2:35. We're starting it now. All right. It's going to be case and the K. Here it is. All right. Seems like Cochrane's not here. Okay. So it's just the case in the K.
Roberto's still in the bathroom, so.
Oh, I didn't even notice. My bad.
No, you're good.
Oh, now Carrick's leaving.
Yep.
Okay.
Bathroom break for everyone. How's y'all's tournament been, Emporia?
It's been all right, you know. Tournament.
Yeah. The NDT sometimes kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Sorry about the wait, I'm back.
You may be back, but Nico's partner is not.
Carrick just got back.
I thought your screen was frozen for a second. You were just T-posing.
Oh, I muted it. Oh, I didn't mute it. Never mind. I'm wrong.
Okay, now I'm muting.
Right, so is everybody Gucci? Okay, it's here. You should vote affirmative to graffiti the U.S. alliance system with pay made to look like blood. That's key to a practice of writing that allows for students to submit to and can attempt to confront language practices outside their own memory and education. That's becomes evidence. Remember the smile from the NATO soldier in the first cursed image. We used the cursed images in the YAC to introduce our reading of NATO members as actors thirsty for blood. And our throw of evidence goes the extra mile to explain how the U.S. uses blood to solidify its own military power. A stable allied blood supply means that the U.S. is able to deploy more soldiers, extract more blood, and are given the flexibility to recreate horror globally, which ensures psychological violence. The biggest impact in this debate is black psychic health. It outweighs on time frame and probability because niggas are dying now, and those deaths only act to modulate and supercharge the psychological impacts. The anti-blackness, the battle fatigue impact guarantees that their model of advocacy through the party would just be straight up exhausting. This means that political activism fails because there is no energy for anybody to change anything, or that energy gets siphoned off because of the increased amount of labor that black people must do while taking psychic violence, which makes them stop doing that work. Now they try to turn this argument by saying that under our framework, only black people would be doing all of this labor. But guess what? We're only doing it for black people, which means that you don't get any access to that increase of labor is directly bringing energy back into the black back to black people, which means that you don't get that offense. And blood logistics is a crucial starting point for analyzing the convergence between anti-blackness and the commodification of black energy in life. I mean, this is the answer to the epigenetics offense. That doesn't mean that our analysis ends with blood, but rather uses that as a starting point for understanding the entirety of the biopsycho-eco-cultural feedback loop that Jackson described. That gets out of their offense because it assumes that we are locked in just as epigenetic analysis, which isn't true. All of our black imagination offense and understanding of the never considered human act on a larger degree of analysis that was conceded in the 2NR, which is a direct answer to the Marriott extension that was in the 1NR. In 2, even if we don't win that, the 2NR recharacterization of the PIC as a move towards the old language of the slave master is a reason to reject. King 19 says that language has been indoctrinated into a system of reform and desires for inclusion that turn all of their offense because it creates systems of labor that never end. Prefer the as move towards street speech, which goes straight up conceded since prospects of the 1AC as a creation of new language practices, and all of my gums work above is sufficient to solve the cap page proper. Carrick's extension of 2 trains running on the permutation is more than enough to give me affirmed you both were. It means that even if they create these communist parties, there's no reason why that space cannot be open for Black people to use for an antagonistic project against the world, which makes it so that it's just a test of competition. If that is possible under their theorization, which all of them, which their own gene evidence is very clear about how Wilderson themselves are able to engage in comradeship, then that means that the app is able to access this more than sufficiently. Now, their argument is that the end of the world as we know it is coming, but that in itself is pretty fucked up when Black people are constantly facing apocalypse right now, and we have literal fucking vampires from the United States federal government sucking out the blood from prisoners of war and sucking out the blood and energy of Black people, making it so that they have to constantly struggle for the U.S. Now, their argument saying that the party is able to solve global violence and ignores our offense about the way in which the alternative functions under the Bledsoe right evidence, which I'll get to later. But the main thing I want to focus on is the conceded piece of King in 16 evidence. If this debate comes down to a question if the app can collectively challenge capitalism, the concession of King is damning all of our offense about how Black political imaginings are able to energize collective action outside the sideline of the slave master. This is demonstrated in two places. One with the graffiti of the Christopher Columbus statue, which doesn't go answer it at all in the UNR, and it specifically makes it so that Black people were able to create connections among themselves to write themselves in the future, and the Indigo Bag, where Black people were able to go into noxious eco zone spaces of death, which guarantees that snitching ain't happening in that region, and it's happening in that region, makes it so that they are outside the sideline of the slave master and creating strategies to escape, revolt, or just survive. And also, under this, it talks about burning down the plantation and other forms to materially take down the structures of capitalism, which are all things that are conceded in the 2NR, which makes it so that we get an internal link into their cap solvency. They've also conceded the root cause debate. The Jackson and 20 evidence is hella specific about the way that slavery's ledger system was foundational to the structuring of capitalism. The ledger system made so that Black people were rendered as gold, weapons, or cattle under the same and had the same value under market value. The main thing I'm going to go for is this Bledsoe and Wright evidence that specifically talks about how Black power movements, land reform movements, and civil rights movements, and all of the communist organizing were all co-opted and were used to reify the influence of capitalist actors, which made it so that the alternative gets sprung right back into that co-option. Their democratic system still is invested in that sovereignty relation. They'll say, hey, you may say, hey, but they want to disrupt property relations, but they conceded a Carrick's analysis about how that giving up of property just makes it so that the state just takes that property back for themselves, and then are taking advantage of that loss, making it so that the biggest impact in this debate is that reproduction of capital. Their entire argument about blood being circulated as a commodity form is the worst thing. That's the status quo.
Good debate, y'all. Good debate.